I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, we explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, toddlers' tantrums and what actually helps. If you are parenting a toddler, you already know this phase can feel intense. 1 minute your child is sweet and curious, and the next there is a full-blown meltdown over the wrong cup or snack.
Hi, I'm Devon Kuntzman, toddler expert and ICF certified coach, the founder of Transforming Toddlerhood, and the author of a book by the same name, and you are listening to the Authentic Parenting Podcast.
In this episode, we talk about what's actually going on during toddlerhood and how to respond in ways that are both firm and compassionate. We explore why tantrums aren't a sign of bad behavior, why the terrible twos is more myth than truth, and how toddlers communicate through their bodies long before they have the words. Devon shares a simple, realistic approach to discipline that includes connection, clear limits, and teaching skills during calm moments, plus a lot of permission for parents to be human. This conversation is grounding, practical, and reassuring, especially if you've ever wondered whether you're doing it right. In celebration of the 10-year anniversary of Authentic Parenting, we have refreshed the format. Guests now introduce themselves, we start with rapid-fire questions, and we close with one big question for every guest. What's the hardest part about parenting? Same show, same conversations you love, just a bit of sparkle and energy. One more thing before you listen. If you want to understand how trauma impacts your body, brain, nervous system, and relationships, and what supports real healing, I have created a free playlist for you. It includes 10 hand-picked conversations with experts like Dr. Gabor Mate, Deb Dana, Dr. Paul Conti, and Dick Schwartz. Download it and start listening today at authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. That's again, authenticparenting.com/trauma kit, one word. And now, please enjoy and thank you for listening. Devon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to speak with you as I love toddlers. As a mom of a 17-year-old, looking back at my parenthood journey, the best times for me, the toddler years and the teen years. So I have prepared some quick rapid-fire questions for you, and I want you to answer yes or no, even though that's not the right answer. Those questions require more explanation, but I think it would be fun to play this game. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, so question number 1. Is the terrible actually a myth?
Yes, it's a myth.
Is my toddler's clinginess a sign of a problem?
Not necessarily.
Do timeouts actually work for toddlers?
Not like we think they do.
Are toddler tantrums a sign of bad parenting?
No.
Is my toddler testing boundaries or just pushing my buttons?
Testing boundaries.
Is it normal, and I know people ask this question a lot, is it normal for my toddler to have big emotional reactions over small things?
Absolutely.
Is it normal for my toddler to cry for no reason?
Yes, but there's a reason.
Is it normal for my toddler to hit and bite?
Yes, that's how they communicate.
Is screen time really that bad for toddlers?
It depends.
Good. And the last question, you're doing really great. Does giving in once in a while to my toddler, does it mean that I ruined my toddler forever?
Absolutely not.
Okay, great. The game is over.
That might have been the hardest game I've ever played because I really want to say so much more about every question.
Of course. Is it true that you were a toddler expert before you had a toddler?
Absolutely. I started Transforming Toddlerhood in 2018, and I did not become a mama until 2022. That being said, I have worked with families and toddlers for the last nearly 20 years.
Okay, so having your own toddler, has anything changed for you in ideas, insights about toddlers or how to approach toddlers?
Absolutely. I think the two biggest things that come to mind are my threshold for hearing crying of my own child is so much lower than I expected it to be. And part of it is just it's hard to hear your child upset. It's hard because we want our kids to feel happy. And it's also hard because it overwhelms our nervous system. And then my child happened to be a high needs, highly sensitive baby that spent about 5 hours plus a day screaming the first 6 months of life. And so I felt like that in infancy, I had enough crying for a lifetime. And so I noticed myself really, really, really wanting to give in, wanting to backtrack when my toddler starts crying to talk myself off that ledge quite often.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think you're just opening, right? Like you're jumping right into the deep end of the pool. I love this. It is so true. We'll talk about the emotions and that of the parent and the toddler. But what I want to ask you is tell us, what's the age for toddlers? Like, who are we talking about?
Yes. Well, if you Google it, ask AI, go all the places, everyone's going to tell you something different. So the way I break it down in my new book, Transforming Toddlerhood, because I break it down in the introduction, is that young toddlers are ages 1 and 2. Older toddlers are ages 3 and 4, and at 5 years old, kids are transitioning from toddlerhood into the school age years. The main differences between young toddlers and older toddlers is their ability to express themselves with words. Young toddlers do not have the expressive language skills. Even though they have the receptive language skills, they can understand a lot they can't tell us. So they tell us things with their behavior, the hitting, kicking, biting, the crying, the tantrums, all the things. This is how they communicate all types of things to us, their feelings, emotions, their sensory needs, their basic needs, their developmental needs, all the things. With older toddlers, they have a better command of language, but they still don't have the impulse control of a 5, 6, 7-year-old because the part of the brain that's responsible for that still isn't maturing at a more rapid pace. So now you have a child who can talk a lot more. So when they are feeling upset, they're going to use the strongest words they know to tell you. Now, there's going to still be some of the other behaviors, but it's going to lessen, and you're going to get things like, you're a mean mommy. You're not my friend anymore. I don't like you. And then we have to start translating that because we can take that personally too. And so anyways, that's how I categorize toddlerhood.
Excellent. I love that. I know. And I think at age 4, the word poopy head emerges. You're a poopy head. You're a poopy head. I remember when my daughter first learned that word and started using, I had read Playful Parenting by Lawrence Cohen. I'm sure you're familiar with that fantastic book. I started playing with her. I said, how do you know mommy's secret name? That's my name. And she's like, no, it's not, mommy. So like we turned that into a game and she really stopped saying poopy head. But when they start learning something like that, parents always like, I feel like, let me ask you a question. I feel like when you are a parent of a young child, a toddler, your best tools have to be creativity, playfulness, fun. But as a tired parent, obviously, it's very hard to be fun, playful, and, with sleepless nights and, work and demands. Tell me, because parents always approach toddlers very seriously, like they argue with them, they try to convince them, no, I'm not a mean mommy, or don't say that word hate. And like they butt heads. So what can you say about not taking things personally, and how should we approach toddlers? What are the skills or the attitudes of a parent?
Yeah. Well, I love the example that you just gave because play is really the language of toddlerhood. And the reason that this works is that, first of all, young children, their lives revolve around play. Second, when we meet a child where they're at in that world of play, then they feel seen and heard. And now we're creating connection. When kids feel connected to us, it increases our influence over them, the positive influence that we have, which creates cooperation. So that's why this works so well. And you're absolutely right. Whenever we are exhausted, stressed, our nervous systems are a wreck, we're going to tend to look at things through our fully mature adult logical brains, where we're just looking at, like, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, very logical. But children's brains don't work that way. They are really emotional. And so we have to connect on the emotional level or with play to really be seen and heard by young kids. But it's very hard to go to that place when we're just stressed and dysregulated. So when it comes to toddlers and toddlerhood, it is so easy to take all of this behavior personally because we have a lot of stories about ourselves and about our kids. And we make that behavior mean something. We start translating it in our brains to mean something about our child and about ourselves instead of just looking at the behavior as neutral, like my kiddo threw his car. That's neutral behavior. That's just a neutral statement. Whereas, oh my gosh, my kid's being so bad. Oh my gosh, I'm failing here. He's out of control. These are the stories we tell ourselves that get us revved up and that make us respond in ways that aren't necessarily working with our child's development.
I also know that has to do with our disillusionment with parenting, our expectations versus reality. Like, it seems like we all want to be parents and become moms and dads. But then when the reality hits, it's a lot harder than the idea of being a mom or a dad. And of course, it's tiresome. We don't sleep well, all sorts of things, postpartum depression, anxiety, right? Like, it's hard for parents. And when your toddler starts developing and walking and talking, you're like, oh my gosh, like, what is this? Just completely dishevels you and dysregulates you all the time.
Absolutely. And it's not just that. I mean, it's the stress of adulting, right? Because then there's like relationship stress, work stress, financial stress, like all the different things. And so it can be really easy to become dysregulated. And then what that does is create this false sense of urgency, this feeling like if we don't do something right now, then our child's going to grow up to be spoiled, a brat, a bully, whatever we're extrapolating based on our child's behavior in this moment, when a lot of the behavior toddlers are having are developmentally appropriate and have nothing to do with who they're going to become in the long run. But we start this like spiral of extrapolating and we like buy into this fear. It increases that sense of urgency that we're already feeling from our stress response. So we think we have to respond right now. But that's usually when we respond in a way that afterwards we're like, why did I just do that? Like, it's just not in alignment with who we want to be. And so my biggest piece of advice for parents is like, don't even worry about how you're going to respond to a behavior until you have established safety. Once you've created the physical safety, and I talk about this in my new book, What It Means to Be a Safe Parent, and you establish that physical safety so you know no one's getting hurt, no one's going to the hospital, then you say, this is not an emergency. I am safe and my child's safe. You say it over and over. You hang sticky notes around your house. Then you start grounding yourself. Because if you respond to your child's behavior in 5 minutes or 50 minutes, it's not going to make a difference as long as everyone's safe. It's okay. It's better to get yourself grounded before diving into trying to sort out the behavior, because guess what? Your kid's not going anywhere. These behaviors aren't going anywhere. So it's okay to take the time to get ourselves regulated first, but most of us don't know that or can't see that because the stress response just hijacks everything.
Hey, I want to invite you to a new adventure. In a world of quick texts and emojis, so much remains unsaid and unprocessed. But when we sit down and write a letter, it helps the thoughts and feelings we've been carrying finally have a voice. Letters have been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I have written many. I use them in my work, and I know how powerful they can be for healing, whether you send them or not. That's why I created a year of letters on Substack. Each week, I share a gentle prompt inviting you to write a letter to yourself, to someone from your past, to an emotion, or to a part of your life that wants attention. We also offer occasional guest sessions and community reflections. You can join anytime, write at your own pace, and leave whenever you need. Join me on Substack, A Year of Letters with Anna Seawald. I would love to write alongside you. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest skills because we are also teaching as we model. And it is one of the most important skills for toddlers to learn: emotion regulation, how to be with their own feelings, and they're learning from us. And oftentimes what I find is we overreact to little things or to things toddlers do, or it's like we take it so seriously, like you said, and we overreact and we want to teach and correct right now in this very moment. But these behaviors are going to repeat and repeat and repeat. I think keeping our eye on the larger picture and like what I always say is like we're teaching skills. Let's work on skill building. And I know you talk about that too. The 3 ingredients, I'm coming to that. So maybe we're going like a little out of order in the book, but I want to ask you to mention the 3 important ingredients for effective parenting.
Yes. So this is such a great point because in the end, when we start looking at behavior as communication and not good or bad, right? Not putting the story on the behavior, not placing the label on the behavior, and look at it as what it really is, which is communication, and we start getting curious about that, then we can start saying, instead of what punishment or what consequence should I give my child for this, we can start saying, whoa, what does my child need to be successful here? What does my child need to really, what skill do they need to learn to be successful? And so that brings me to what I like to call the recipe for healthy, effective discipline. And it is creating connection, setting limits and following through, and teaching skills. You need all 3 of these ingredients for successful discipline. And the thing is that I have a lot of videos that have gone viral on, especially on Facebook recently, and the comments in there is gentle parenting's for suckers. This is why we have a whole generation of kids that are X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. And the biggest thing that people get wrong is that gentle parenting doesn't mean that we don't have limits and boundaries. But sometimes people who are trying to do gentle parenting forget that part because it is hard to set those limits. So that's what would happen if we only had the connection piece and the teaching skills piece, but never had any limits, then kids are going to be running wild. Also, if we never had any connection or teaching skills and we only had limits and boundaries, but then we weren't taking our kids' feelings and emotions into account and teaching them the skills they need to be successful, then we're going to be in like a compliance-based, fear-based parenting spiral that isn't supportive of a child's emotional development. So that's why I created this idea that we have to have all 3 ingredients in the recipe to like bake the cake.
I recently had a client who told me that his ex-wife blamed him for not being on board with gentle parenting. And of course, when I heard about what that means to them, it's that permissive parenting that a lot of people practice these days. And they call it gentle parenting. We've done lots of episodes with my colleague Laura Froen on the harms of gentle parenting, what gentle parenting means, and I'll link that in the show notes. But gentle parenting doesn't mean like let your kid run the household and do whatever you want and you be hands off. It just means don't punish your kids harshly. Be gentle with discipline and their feelings. I want to talk about connection because this father told me that, you know, his wife learned from the internet, I guess, from the online gurus, that connection is everything. And she was not letting the husband, the father parent, because she would say things like, well, you need to work on your connection first to establish trust with our kid in order to discipline. And it's like, I want you to speak about connection. I know people can take it too far. And on the internet, it has become this connection is everything. Connection, build connection with your kids, connection. So tell me what it is not, and how do we build connection with our toddlers? How do we know that we are in connection? Because I know you have a lot to say about this.
Yes, I have a whole chapter of this in my book. And the one thing that I want to say, just in response to this idea of parenting partners, which I have a whole chapter and of that in my book too, of how to really bridge the gap between differences with your parenting partner so you can parent together. But what I want to say is that there is more than one way to get to the same outcome. And I think as parents who want to parent together with our co-parents, whether we're with them still or if we're not with them, we have to understand that there's more than one way to get to the same outcome. There isn't only one right way. So that is going to relieve a lot of stress to know that. So then going into this idea of connection is it's a superpower. Okay. Connection, when we're able to do it, lets our children feel seen and heard. When a child feels seen and heard, they're automatically going to become more regulated because they feel connected to us. And that is very soothing to their nervous system, especially if we're in a place where we are regulated or mostly regulated, then they are going to feed off of that as well. So connection truly is a superpower. And sometimes connection is enough to resolve whatever challenge is happening because the kid truly just wants to feel seen and heard. That being said, it doesn't mean that if you don't practice connection every single second, every single minute of every day, that a child's not going to trust you, or you're not going to be able to get to the outcome that you're looking to. That yes, this is part of the recipe, but we don't have to think of things as linear, absolute every time, every day. So there's tons of ways to create connection. It might be in the moment when your child's having a hard time and you say, hey, I see you throwing all of your toys. What are you trying to tell me? What's happening here? And it's also setting a limit like, oh, you're really frustrated that we can't go to the park right now. I get it. And these toys aren't for throwing. It's not safe, And so we can set limits and still see kids. Connection is something that is built over time and built in lots of different ways, just by reading books with your child at night, delighting in your child, saying, thanks for coming with me to the grocery store. Not that your child had a choice, but guess what? When I say things like this to my toddler, when I say, I had so much fun with you, thanks for coming, or yeah, thanks for coming to the grocery store with me, I really appreciate it. He looks at me and goes, thanks, Mama, because what I'm doing is I'm teaching gratitude. I am creating connection there. And the more little moments that I'm creating connection throughout the day, the easier it is to get over those humps when my, toddler goes into a tantrum or gets upset about something.
Yes, the micro moments of connection are important. I feel like sometimes some people misunderstand connection and they think it's a thing you do, like an activity or a step one, as opposed to it's just a feeling, how you feel in the moment and how you connect with your child at the moment and how they perceive that energy exchange. It's not like you can be frazzled, but if you learn that connection is key and you're like, okay, I'm going to connect with my kid now, then that's not connection. Like that's an agenda based. Do you know what I'm saying? It can seem I hear people say, but I connected with my child. I just did this and that, but it's not like a doing thing. Connection, it's a quality, it's an energy, it's presence, it's the way you look at your child. Maybe you're not even saying anything, but the way you're looking at them, you're expressing that wonder, that delight, that connection, right? Say a little more about how people misunderstand connection.
Yeah. So what I find with parents is that whenever they say, I connected with my kid and it didn't work, the biggest thing that's happening there is that we're still stuck in that stress response and we're still giving into that sense of urgency, thinking that we have to resolve whatever's happening this second or the world's going to end because our stress response is tricking us into this. And so we have to fight against our biology to get out of that mindset, right? But that's what's happening there. So what we have to realize is that connection isn't about what you think you did. It's about how your child feels in that moment. And your child can still be upset and be connected to you. So it doesn't mean that your child's happy and that you have to keep connecting until your child's quote unquote happy. But it also doesn't mean that you say a few words and then like move forward. We often try to move forward way faster than kids are ready for. But that also doesn't mean that we have to just spend an hour on something. Sometimes if we slow down by a minute or two, it can make a really, really big difference.
Yes, slow down, but not to the point of spending an hour, because I see that sometimes in my permissive clients, they take this way, prolonging way too far, and that's also not effective. You need to set limits or whatever you have to do, like do over, teach a skill or something, because prolonging it too much is also not good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of an example of when your child's having a tantrum. Okay. So we want to help them feel seen and heard. We don't want to punish them for having big emotions, right? So less is more during a tantrum. The more that we can ground ourselves and stay calm, make sure they're physically safe, make sure we're physically safe, and then work on just that emotional safety piece, which is really grounding ourselves, calming ourselves down so we can share our calm with our kiddo. The thing is that sometimes when we are just in that phase where our child's letting out their emotions and we're just trying to stay calm and grounded, sometimes we wait for kids to make the first move to move forward. Like what I find is like we're either moving too forward too fast and we're like just skipping over their feelings and emotions and their needs and all of that, or we're like spending way too long. And so sometimes if a child sees you still there in that spot, they're going to be like, oh, maybe there is a chance. Maybe there's a chance that they're going to reverse what they just said. So, if I just double down, maybe there's a chance. Not because your child's manipulating you, because kids are strategic in getting their needs met, because toddlers rely on us to meet their physical and emotional needs. They can't do that themselves. They can't drive to the grocery store and buy groceries and come home and cook a meal and feed themselves. They're reliant on us to get all of their needs met. It's a very vulnerable place to be as, a young child. And so in these moments, we just have to remember that we need to move forward sometimes. So sometimes if we start moving forward, turn on some music, get out a toy, sit down and start playing, you'll see in a minute or two, your child will all of a sudden be sitting beside you playing with that toy train and no longer at the pantry door having a meltdown over like having another round of goldfish crackers or something.
Yes, I know. You're not, I just want to clarify and state it again that you're not suggesting distracting them out of their feelings. You're not lingering in like, let's explore your feelings. Tell me how you're feeling. Because parents, gentle parents especially, can do this way too far, too intense, too prolonged. But with toddlers, you want to slow it down, but you also want to move through and move forward so that it's easier for everyone for above mentioned reasons. Like, yeah, toddlers are not manipulating you. They're not there to push your buttons. They're not doing all those malicious things that sometimes people can feel.
And to clarify, it's really about this idea of distracting kids out of their feelings and emotions. A lot of parents want to distract a kid to prevent the tantrum from happening. So they give them a phone, give them a screen, give them a snack, give them a toy from Target, whatever it is. And that's where we're getting into like more challenging territory because we're like not letting our kids feel their emotions and release their emotions. That is different than a child who is having a tantrum and is expressing their feelings and emotions, but stuck in that loop and needs our help and guidance to start moving forward and getting out of that loop. So,
Can you give me an example, perhaps from your parenting, since you are fresh in the toddler years? A successful example, how you set a limit, perhaps listen to your child's feelings and came out of that cycle.
yeah, absolutely. So recently, my son wanted a mango bar. He loves these, like, dried mango bars.
Like, what's a mango bar? I would love
So
that.
good. It's a brand called Solly. It's like a fruit strip, but made of like mangoes and stuff. And he loves them. It's fruit, but it's also like 1 million grams of sugar and it tastes really great. And so he had seen one out and I was like, all right, like, sure, you can have this. You see it. I'm not going to just pretend it's not here. That's fine. Then he wanted another one. It was like yanking on the pantry door. And I had to get in between him and the pantry and say, I'm sorry, the mango bars are finished. I know you love them so much and you really want another, and they're all done now. And then he's like just trying to get in the pantry. And then all of a sudden he's on the ground. He's just crying. And I know he's hungry. This kid is hungry. He's having a blood sugar crash, but I'm not just going to keep fueling that blood sugar crash, right? So, and walk over next to our kitchen. I grab his plate and put it on the floor beside me. I get out some magnetile blocks and I turn on his Tony box, which is like something playing songs. And I just start building a tower with his magnetiles. Within a couple of minutes, he's sitting beside me. He's got his hand on a car and he took a bite of his chicken. Yes, we're not at the table, but we're out of the tantrum and my kid is eating. And so this is also where we need to understand that having flexibility can be helpful. Just because I had my kid eating lunch on the floor that day does not mean that now my toddler is always going to want to eat lunch on the floor. And if I would have tried to force him to the table in that moment, we probably would have continued to string a meltdown. So this is where there's more than one way to get to the same outcome. And flexibility is really key in parenting. But again, flexibility is not the same as permissiveness. I was still holding the boundary that this is your lunch and this is the food I'm giving you. But how he consumed that lunch, I was flexible about because he was having a hard time right then.
What I love about this is that you did, which a lot of people make this mistake, over explaining, going down and telling why they set the limits, why they can't have it, what blah, 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 too much, and going into the emotions. Sometimes creating a mountain out of molehill situations, even because the more you dig, the more the toddler will get into this situation deeper. But what I love is it's like less is more, less words. You did things with your behavior. You also set the limit with your behavior, not only with your words, which is very powerful. And I agree, you met the need without saying, and this is one of my pet peeves, when parents articulate and say to the kid, you're hungry, you're tired, you're this, you're that. Don't say that to the kid. Think it and meet the need. Why are you saying that to the kid? Like, there's zero usefulness in that. So I want to hear your thoughts about that when you tell the toddler, oh, you're acting like this because you're tired. You're doing this because you're that. Great. You have decoded the behavior for yourself. One more thing I want to say. This is so juicy. If your child wants to eat chicken again on the floor, the lunch next time, that's another opportunity for setting a limit and saying, no, we're going to have it at the table. So it's this ongoing experiment. If you have a nice, playful attitude around toddlers, it will serve you so well.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just so imperative to understand that being flexible, what we're really doing is meeting our child's needs within our boundaries, but there's a lot of different ways to meet a child's needs in these moments. And when it comes to like saying, oh, you're this or you're that, like, first, I just want to congratulate parents that like have gotten curious and they've gotten to the root of like what is at the root of the behavior, because it's not easy. So that's great. And I think it goes a lot further with a child, especially like I think parents want to say this sometimes because they want to help their child create awareness, like, oh, this is happening because you're hungry. But also, a hungry child probably not going to hear it or really internalize it the way that we're thinking. So sometimes what I suggest to parents that like still really want to work on creating that awareness is saying something like, "Oh, I wonder if you're feeling hungry." And then move on because you're not prescribing something, you're not labeling the child, which some kids can really push back against. So you're not prescribing, you're just being curious out loud, which I find helps parents practice curiosity and goes over a lot better with kiddos, where it doesn't activate their developmental drive to push against us and create power struggles, but can also support that idea of creating awareness.
I love this. I love this. This sounds like my friend Laura Froen. I wonder if you're hungry. That sounds so much nice and calm and better. As opposed to, here is, I'm thinking this out loud, maybe this is not true, but if you say to a child over and over, you're crying because you're this, you did this because you're tired. If we're constantly saying that to a child, hearing that over and over the years is going to create a child who's going to use excuses for their behavior and not take responsibility for things. Because, do you know what I'm saying? That can have a flip side to it.
It absolutely can. Like I don't know that it's like a linear line for every child, but depending on your kid's personality and temperament, absolutely. Or it like, might have a child looking outside themselves for people to tell them what to do and how they feel versus like working through it themselves and identifying it themselves, which is not super supportive once someone's an adult also. And so if we're just thinking about like habits that support emotional resilience, that's where coming from that place of curiosity is like putting something out there, but allowing kids to still have that, that ownership of like, I wonder what is happening here. And by creating these habits and way of communicating when kids are younger, then you're going to have like a 6 and 7 year old that is like used to this, like, oh, I wonder if you're hungry. And they might like do something and then be like, okay, I think I'm feeling really hungry and let's get a snack and then try this again. Because if they heard us saying that, then they're like, oh, okay, like let's try this again. And so it's about creating social emotional awareness and social emotional skills without labeling kids or telling them what their experience is, because we truly can't know what someone else's experience is. I mean, we can have empathy, but we can't truly know exactly what someone else is thinking or feeling because we can't be inside their bodies and their heads.
Another thing I want you to talk about is when parents say, use your inside voice, be kind, be gentle, use gentle hands. Those kinds of statements, they sound nice and positive, but like a toddler doesn't know what you're talking about. I find that when it comes to toddlers, you just have to show and tell. And by showing, you have to say, this is how we pet, this is how we touch, this is how we do things. Yes, it's a little involved in the beginning, but you're building skills. So what parents can replace with those kinds of statements? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so modeling is so important. Instead of saying something like, say it nicely, you might say something like, oh, I can help. Please ask me in a talking voice like this. Or, oh, I want to help you. I can give that to you when you ask me in a talking voice like this, And so you're modeling the voice, you're saying it's like a talking voice, which is very like neutral. It's not like being nice or being mean. And again, these are all the labels that we place on behavior for interpretation. But here's the thing, if you're constantly like telling your toddler that they're not being nice or that they're being mean, kids internalize this. Ages 1 to 5 is such a sensitive period for kids developing their sense of self for the very first time. And they're constantly internalizing the spoken and unspoken things that we are saying about kids, who they are and what they're and who they are and their behavior. They're internalizing all of that. And so the more that we tell kids that they're being bad, being mean, we're actually creating like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because this is how kids start to identify. And then that's going to inform their behavior in a negative way.
Yeah, I really dislike how preschools do this sometimes unintentionally. Send a note or like, Jackie was good today, or in front of the child when it's like departure time, they may say, "Oh, Alex was a good boy today." And when I talk to early childhood educators, I'm like, please, like, don't say those kinds of statements. These are really harmful, especially if the child is right there. This binary good or bad, nice and not nice. It's just not a, we have to like steer away from that.
Yeah, it's just like the labels that we're placing on kids. And this is the thing. Someone might say, okay, well, if it's a positive label, is that a problem? According to the research, yes, it can be because, like, for example, if you're always saying, oh, you're so smart, look at you, you're so smart, then you end up having a kid who is identifying with being smart, which you might think, oh, that probably boosts their confidence. That's like really positive. But now you might have a kid that's afraid to try new things, afraid to take risks, because if they fail, then they wouldn't be smart anymore. And so it creates this like fear of failure and like perfectionistic mentality that can be really challenging for kids and really anxiety producing as they grow up. And so, I'm not saying this to tell parents like, gosh, now you need to like monitor every little thing you say and like run it through like a fact checker to see if this is like good for your kids' emotional health or not. But basically just what we're saying here is that practice the skill of, instead of using labels to identify your child and their behavior, start observing and describing what's happened. So when we say something like, oh, Alex was so good at school today, the teacher could say something like, instead might say, Alex cleaned up his toys whenever we said it was time to clean up. Alex was a great helper at lunch and helped clear the table. This is the neutral feedback of what happened. And so really we just need to practice observing and describing, which in my book, that is one of the first ways that we can create emotional connection. I didn't say this before, but we can create connection physically and emotionally. And one of the 5 ways to create emotional connection is observe and describe.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, like I have to have you back like 5 more times. I want to ask you about screen time, about transitions, about tantrums, but maybe instead of going into like a new topic, having a new sibling, a screen time, let's just continue with the emotional regulation, the tantrums, the meltdowns. I think maybe I can have you another time for another episode. I think that makes more logical sense.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So, and of course, people can buy your book and follow you on the socials. I know you have a large following and you dish out good advice. So you're a reliable source. I normally don't endorse a lot of like social media stuff, but I think you're brilliant. So let's talk about then the toddler's emotional brain. And first of all, what is your favorite part about toddlers?
I love that you asked that. I think the most precious thing about toddlerhood is, gosh, it's hard for me to narrow it down, but it's 2 things. It's the unconditional love that kids have. Kids are so innocent by nature at this age. And by innocent, I mean that they haven't been jaded by the world and society, and they live in the present moment, which includes this idea of unconditional love. Like they're not holding grudges. They're not dwelling on what happened 5 minutes ago or 5 hours ago. They're living in the present moment and they love us unconditionally. And it's really a beautiful thing seeing that unconditional love modeled. The other thing I really love is just, it's a time of firsts. I just love like the first time your child walks, the first words they say, the first time they ride a bike, the first time they like swim across the pool on their own, or, all these things. And I just think the first Christmas that your child is excited to open gifts or whatever it is, I just think all of these firsts are such a precious time in life and such beautiful memories. And sometimes we don't even notice how precious all of these firsts are because we're too bogged down by the challenges of toddlerhood.
Yeah, I agree. And so then tell me, how can we let's say I am regulated as a parent. What are the steps required to help my child label the emotion, feel their feelings, and like feel the cycle and come out the other side of the emotional outburst or tantrum or meltdown? Obviously, it's a process, but we're going to do a quick.
Yes, no, it's a process. And this is the teaching skills piece. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to this in my book as well. And basically, the most important thing about teaching skills is we're not teaching skills at like the height of a tantrum, in the middle of a frustration. We're teaching the skills in the calm moments, which might be 5 minutes later, might be 5 hours later, 5 days later, but what it is about consistently practicing the skills that we want our child to learn in the calm moments. See, oftentimes we miss the calm moments or the moments that our child's having the behavior we want to see because we kind of like disassociate or like blank out because we're like, oh, there's no fires to put out. So we just don't see what's happening. But those moments are the moments where we have so much power to support our kids in learning the skills that they need. Because in those moments, their brains are primed for learning because they're not in a stress response. They're in a regulated state where they can learn. So what are you going to do? Make it simple. You don't have to do all kinds of fancy stuff. Of course, you can get as in-depth as you want, but a great place to start is getting some books. There's lots of books out there about big feelings, big emotions, and big behaviors. Get those books and read them before bed or in a quiet moment in the afternoon. Or my son loves to read books when he first wakes up. My eyes are like half open, but I will power through 1 to 2 books first thing in the morning. And then I have to be like, okay, that's enough for now. But reading books is a great way because you don't have to have all the answers. The book is like the guide. So I'd say that's really the starting place. But also every moment that you're in a challenging moment and you pause, because you've established that physical safety, you remind yourself it's not an emergency and you start to create that pause. Every time you pause and you work on grounding yourself and calming yourself, whatever you're doing, do it in front of your child. Let them see it because you're modeling what it looks like to go from seeing red to a more calm state. And your child is picking up on that. And it didn't even involve any active teaching. It was just you being a human being, but also being a human being who is vulnerable and willing to practice to learn new skills yourself.
How about helping kids label their feelings? At what age should parents do that? And how do you recommend, like, when do we talk about feelings and how do we process them? All of those things. Because there's one thing when you're feeling the feeling, expressing the feeling, and processing the feeling, right? These are like different things. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, it can start at any point in time talking about feeling. So earlier today, you were crying. Tell me more about that. I wonder if you were feeling frustrated. You really wanted to bake cookies and we didn't have time to bake cookies today. And I think you might have been feeling frustrated about that. Tell me about it. Even if you have a 1 or 2-year-old, like they're not going to be able to tell you everything, but guess what? You're setting up the pattern of communication that's going to serve you for many, many, many years. But just starting to identify your own feelings and emotions, like, oh, I was feeling frustrated earlier. Everyone was running around and I felt like no one could hear me. And then I felt frustrated inside. Right? Like talking about our own feelings and emotions, as long as we're owning them and using I statements, can be really helpful. Looking in the mirror and making different faces to match them to different emotions. The options are endless, but my biggest thing for parents is don't overcomplicate it. Just let it be natural. And as long as you're willing to learn and grow, your child's going to learn and grow as well.
Yeah, so you are not recommending you upset mommy because you did this. No, I'm kidding.
I felt frustrated.
I know.
I felt like everyone was running around and wrestling on the floor. And I said, hey, everyone. And no one looked at me. And I felt really unheard. And then I felt frustrated. Okay, yes, it's a lot of words, but guess what? When we talk it out for ourselves and validate ourselves, we also tend to calm down because It's the hardest thing about parenting. No one's coming to validate our feelings and emotions and experience, right? Like we are responsible for doing that for ourselves.
Hey, don't speak too soon. Maybe they can create a robot now that can be that external co-regulating person for parents. I mean, imagine how funny that would be. I'm going to trademark that. To conclude, Devon, I really enjoy talking to you. You're like such a wonderful resource. Like I'm going to have you again, I promise. But to conclude, I want to ask you one question. What is the hardest part of parenting for you in your own experience?
I think the hardest part of parenting is to not compare, whether that's comparing to the neighbor, a friend, or whatever is happening on social media, knowing that you are a unique person, you have a unique family and a unique child, and just focusing on what your own family's needs and wants are is really the hardest thing in this digital age when we're constantly bombarded from every direction, because having all of that, being bombarded, having all of this comparison is what also fuels a lot of that fear and anxiety that dysregulates us and makes it harder for us to stay calm because we're like, we're not doing it right. That's not what this person said. That, and it like starts to like take us further away from our intuition and knowing our unique child. Because everything I've said here, it's not about the right way or the wrong way. There's more than one path to every outcome. It's about taking information and filtering it to how does this apply to my unique family?
Yeah, thank you so much. I truly appreciate this time with you. It went by so fast, like the toddler years. Congratulations on the book. And I'll have links in the show notes for everything, and people will follow you. And I'm so delighted that you were able to join me today.
Thank you very much.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening. This episode was edited and produced by Aminur. If you need expert support to bring your dream podcast to life, from editing to full production, Aminur can help make it happen. You'll find his link in the show notes.